All right, welcome to another episode of the Scripting Den podcast. I'm Fernando as usual, and today I want to cover 4 things that you can do to improve your coding skills. If you're new, if you're a new developer, if you're looking to step up your game and you just don't know how or where to get started, I'm gonna give you 4 tips here, but just a heads up so that there are no surprises down the line on the episode. They all revolve around writing code often. I'm not going to suggest places where you can get tutorials from. I'm not going to suggest YouTube channels where you can watch people coding or things like that. I think that tutorials definitely help when you have one specific question to answer. You know, you want to know how to implement authentication with Next. Fine, get a tutorial, see how it's done, and then move on. But if you're just looking to improve the way you code in general, I don't think there are tutorials that will help you that or in that area, or at least that will give you something practical to work on. Instead, you'll just be in the loop of, going from one tutorial to the next without really understanding or really knowing where to go next when you're faced with a real problem and without the training wheels of the tutorial. So what I want to show you here, what I want to cover here are four ways in which you can find ideas or ways to create more code, to write more code on your own and solve real problems. So the first thing that I'm going to talk about is to reproduce projects from others. So yes, we're talking about creating your own side project here. So if you don't have time, then this might not be the best for you. But then again, this is not going to be create a full project that will be used by millions of developers or millions of users. We're just talking about here trying to figure out the best way for you to reverse engineer a particular project and just write your version of it. Just as clumsy as you can, just as fast or as slow as you can at your own pace. There is no time limit here. There is now nobody expecting you to release this out. In fact, you don't have to. The point here is that you should try to reproduce someone else's project without looking at the code. Why is that? Because that way you first get to try and think about how to solve particular problems that you face that can be solved because this other project has solved them, without going the easy route and copy pasting the solution and then trying to understand it. Just put yourself in the shoes of whoever created this project and try to figure out a way in which you, with the current tools you have, would solve those problems. If you have questions, then you'll be able to search for them because there'll be specific questions. It's going to be, how do I implement a queue in JavaScript, for example? How do I read a file in C? I don't know. Things like that. So you'll have specific questions that will have specific answers on Google or, in fact, on tutorials. But you'll be doing that research to create a project on your own. My suggestion would be to go for simple projects like a library, something easy with 1, 2, 3 features, 3 functionalities, and that's it. Don't try to reproduce something as big as React, for example, because that will require you to learn a lot about everything, essentially, how the browser works, how the DOM works, and so on, to the point where you might be overwhelmed by everything that you have to research before you actually write your first line of code. So try to keep it simple, or in fact, if you want to go with React, for example, because you feel like you know it, don't try to reproduce the entire project. Don't try to reproduce the whole of React. Just one feature. Just focus on one feature of React and try to reproduce it. I myself wrote an article called demystifying reactivity, writing your own version of React, essentially, that would create, that would give me the ability to have reactive behavior on my code without using React. But I left out like JSX support. I left out a lot of features that React has, just to focus on this particular scenario where reactivity was key. So my first suggestion is go that route. If you have time, you don't have to have like 3-4 hours every single day. You might want to spend 30 minutes, an hour, once every 2-3 days working on this. Just focus on one problem and figure out how to solve it. That will make you face a real world problem, and it will give you the tools to understand how to solve that kind of problem in the future. And you'll learn how to research to solve those kind of problems in the future, which is key. Now, a very similar situation, but if you don't want to like create a project from scratch, another solution would be to join or contribute at least to an open source project. GitHub is filled with open source projects. In fact, the internet is filled with open source. Now, if you've never done it, finding the right first open source project is not ideal. There are many websites that will guide you through the initial process of finding one that is looking for first-time contributors, is looking for people who are learning how to contribute to open source, and then you can actually use those sites to, through those projects, learn how open source contribution works. I'll make sure to add links to these sites on the show notes so you can start looking into it. It's a great way to learn to work in teams, especially if you haven't really done it yet. Maybe you're looking for your first developer job and you want to have some experience on how GitHub works, how PRs works, and so on. This going down this route of contributing to open source might be a great practice. Obviously, then later, once you join a team, each team will have their own standards and their own way of working, but at least you'll have a base to go from. So yes, find an open source project and then try to contribute to it. That here you're not just trying to step up your game in regards of coding, you're also improving your game when it comes to interacting with other developers, interacting with other projects, and understanding their workflows. So you might not be making big code improvements or contributions. You might just be like improving the documentation at one point. But the point is, you're going through the entire process of doing a change, going through Git, creating a proper commit message, proper PR, going through the approval process and review process and so on. So only going through that, even if you're not contributing to code, it's going to be a learning experience. So don't disregard this because you might think that you're not at the level at which you can contribute to big projects. It doesn't really matter how you contribute. All contributions to open source are usually well received if you follow the standards of the project. So keep that in mind. Now, third one, kind of a mix of the previous two would be to work on your personal projects. Now, I'm not talking about recreating someone else's project or someone else's library. I'm talking about going all into your own product. This is huge. This is not something that you will do once a week for a couple of hours. This is something that you might want to do every day for a few hours. If you have them, that's great. Or just like several hours during the weekend or whenever you have time. But the point is, this is not something that you do lightly. Working on your personal project means you're creating a product, be it a SaaS, be it a library, framework, new framework, or whatever. You're creating code and trying to solve a problem. This is the ideal learning scenario. Clearly, this is not for everyone, simply because not everyone has the motivation to go through this, and there is nothing wrong if you don't have it. There are a lot of things in life that are more deserving of that motivation than working on your personal project. So don't feel bad if you don't have an idea or if you just don't have the drive to do it. But if you do, this is the best way to learn. Why? Because you're gonna be hitting every single wall related to software development that there is. Learning how to create a project, learning how to set it up, learning how to deploy it, learning how to deal with databases, or how to eventually distribute your project, whether it's a web project or you have a mobile project or whatever. You're learning about everything related to getting a product out. As a developer, this is a great learning scenario. It takes a lot of time. It's going to be hugely frustrating at first because you're not going to know how to solve any of these problems at first, but through research and patience, you'll get there. So definitely, I would recommend working on your personal project if you know you have the time, and if you go into it knowing that it's going to be frustrating as hell. If you're happy with this scenario, then just please, by all means, go ahead and do it. Go into it knowing that you're doing it to learn, not because you're trying to get money out of this experience or anything. Just go into it as a learning experience and see what it takes to actually develop a full product and launch it. You'll see that there is a lot more to it than just coding, and you'll learn a lot through the process. So definitely something I would recommend. And then the final option, and I really, really recommend this one, either if you're already interested in one of the previous three or not, is to write. Essentially, write technical articles. Now, I know what you're thinking, who am I to write and explain things to people? Who am I to say how to create or write a piece of code if I don't really know it myself? Now, here's the kicker. If you're doing it right, if you actually want to explain a concept to someone, you have to research that concept until you know it by heart, and then, only then, you can explain it. That's how it works, because you start covering something, you start explaining something at a high level, and then you yourself start asking yourself the questions of, what if you go this route? What happens if you do this? What happens if, this data comes in this format or whatever? And then you have to go find the answer to that question, and maybe you'll write it as part of the article, maybe you won't, but you would have learned something in the middle. I personally really like the option of writing technical articles. I've been doing it for years myself, and I found that it's made me a better developer overall. It's made me better at English. As you probably guessed by now, I'm not a native English speaker. I'm still struggling to improve my spoken English, but I've improved my written English a ton since I started writing. So definitely a good alternative through there. English is something that is a language that we have to know as developers, so it's always useful to improve it. As I am writing more and more articles, I've also improved my communication skills, because I've found new ways to explain concepts that are complex by nature and made them into simpler explanations, essentially, so that everyone can understand them, no matter what their technical level is. So that's also a great way to practice and to learn more about a concept. And then obviously through my technical writing, I've also kept up with my coding, even while I was not working on a development role. I haven't been an actual developer for many years now. I had many roles in the meantime, but I've always kept coding because of my technical articles. Clearly, they've not been as intensive. My coding hasn't been as intensive as it was when I was an actual developer, but I still kept up with the main languages I've always used, with the new frameworks that are being released, all thanks to my technical writing, all thanks to me trying to explain concepts in my writing. Where can you do it? I mean, if you don't have already a blog where you can just upload your articles, don't bother creating one. Don't bother even like stressing about it. There are places like dev.to, hashnote.com, or even medium.com that will help you get started within 2 minutes of signing up. You'll be able to start writing and publishing. Now, keep in mind, if you're new, if you've not done it before, you might not get great feedback at first or any feedback at all, but that's not the point. You're doing it as a practice of your own, and you're doing it as a way to learn new things, find excuses to read or research other concepts that you're not usually having to deal with, and then explain them on your own words. That's all you care about at this point. Eventually, you might start looking into growing your blog and growing your presence, and then trying to have an impact on other developers other than you. But that's something completely out of the scope of this episode. Right now, at this stage, all you should care about is focusing on writing for yourself, trying to explain concepts for yourself, essentially, and trying to play with technologies, languages, frameworks that you don't usually play with because your work doesn't allow you, because it doesn't take you that way. And you'll learn a ton from that experience. So definitely something I recommend to all developers. And that's it. That's the extent of this episode. So remember, 4 things that will definitely improve your coding skills are reproducing someone else's project and trying to figure out how they've solved those problems. Contribute to open source if you can. Work on a personal project of your own. Create something completely from scratch, from zero to deployment. Or just write articles, write technical articles, learn about different concepts, and look for ways to explain them in simple terms. You'll learn a ton. But essentially, it all revolves around just keep coding and code often. That way, you'll have to solve problems. You'll learn new techniques. You'll learn about new technology, and you'll be able to practice it. That's it. That's the episode. I hope, as usual, that you found it interesting, that you found something to take home and use. So if you have, just make sure to reach out. I would love to know what you think about the episode and about the podcast. And that's it. I'll see you on the next episode. Bye. And that was it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. And don't forget to rate the podcast in your favorite podcasting app so that it can reach more developers. In the meantime, if you'd like to follow me on Twitter, or X as people call it, just look for me at DeleteMan123. And that's it. Thank you, and catch you on the next one.